The Final Fantasy VII PC speedrun has seen a renaissance in the last couple of years, transforming from a run very similar to the console speedrun to an insane showcase of how broken the game can truly be. It includes all sorts of different types of tricks to skip different parts of the game, a newer version of Calm Skip which allows us to skip the Nibelheim flashback even quicker, and of course the Wrong Warp, which allows us to travel from the Junon area all the way to the end of the game. But incredibly, a new version of the Wrong Warp has been found, and will allow runners to break the 1 hour and 40 minute barrier and bring the speedrun to even greater heights. In this video, I'm going to quickly go over how the new Wrong Warp works, how it's different from the original Wrong Warp, and how it saves time in the speedrun. First things first, the new Wrong Warp was found by community member Chuky. The groundwork for this warp had originally been found by Zero Kainos, but the implementation and the route was all found by Chuky. Also, if you're watching this video and you're wondering what a Wrong Warp even is, be sure to watch my original video about the Wrong Warp in Final Fantasy VII. It doesn't only talk about how the Wrong Warp works, but it talks about the entire history of the Wrong Warp, how it was found, and how it completely revolutionized Final Fantasy VII. So be sure to watch that first and then come back and finish this video. So first off, what does this Wrong Warp actually do? Well, in the original Wrong Warp that we've been doing for years, we have to go to Calm and start the Nibelheim flashback, then escape the flashback without Sephiroth in our party. That allows Cloud to game over during the flashback and trick the game into keeping a certain flag in memory when we load a different save. That flag confuses the game into warping us to the field ID, which matches the last battle ID that we ran away from. So at that point, we run away from a battle whose battle ID matches the field ID of the debug room. Then we simply win a battle and it warps us to the debug room and we can finish the game. This Wrong Warp takes a different approach, and believe it or not, it warps us from the very first save point in the game all the way to the debug room. Unfortunately, it doesn't exactly skip the entire game. We do still have to fight our way all the way out of Midgar in order to set up the glitch. Our goal will be to get out of Midgar, set our field ID to match the field ID of the debug room, then warp back into the number 1 reactor and save the game. When you save the game doesn't check what field you're currently on, it only checks what your current field ID is. So by doing this, we can save the game, then load that same save, and it will place us in the debug room. Now, how are we going to set the field ID to match the debug room? Well, pretty much the same way we did in the previous Wrong Warp. We're going to simply find a battle whose battle ID matches the field ID of the debug room. This places the battle ID where the field ID should be, and as long as we load a save on the world map, the field ID will never change. Now normally, when you move from the world map to a field, the game will correctly change the field ID to what it should be. But if you warp to a field in a way the game is not intending, it will never have the opportunity to change the field ID to what it should be, and it will stay the debug room ID. So the next question is, how are we going to warp back to the number 1 reactor? Believe it or not, we're going to be using this, the timer that starts after beating Guard Scorpion. This timer, just like the Nibelheim flashback, gives you a very special flag that stays active until the timer runs out. And just like the Nibelheim flashback, if we game over with the timer still active and load a file that's on the world map, the timer will travel with us. The timer never gets initialized to its 10-minute value, and instead just sits at 0. So as soon as we enter a battle, the timer will hit 0 and it will end the battle. What happens now is a bit complicated. Normally when you're in the number 1 reactor and the timer hits 0, the game will send you back to the field module for just a second and then play the FMV of the reactor exploding, followed by the game over screen. However, this time, most of that will be cut off, and it's simply just going to send us to the field module. Now, as explained in my Wrong Warp video, when the game tries to send you from the world map straight to the field module, it simply takes the last field ID that you've been on, which in this case would be the number 1 reactor. So this warp pretty much allows you to take any save file on the world map and take that party into the number 1 reactor and kind of start the game over from scratch. All of this was already known about though, Zero Kainos had done extended research when he originally found battle mode warping and tried warping with all the different timers in the game, including the train timer and Emerald Weapons timer. However, Chuky found out that there is a way to manipulate this field ID just like we manipulate the field ID in the original wrong warp method. The way to do this is to game over before the timer hits 0. Now you may be wondering, how do we game over when the timer is already at 0 as soon as the fight starts? Well, it's simple. Start a fight with already dead party members. This allows us to game over before the timer hitting 0 activates, successfully setting the field ID to whatever that battle's battle ID is. Now, if you've watched my channel for a while, you've probably seen me discuss how to get a dead party using the PHS. It's actually extremely simple and you can do it yourself. Just simply kill 2 party members, swap them out, kill Cloud, and then swap the dead party members back in. However, for the speedrun route, there's a bit of a problem. See, the whole idea of this new wrong warp route is to never have to do the Nibelheim flashback. Even though we have Calm Skip, the PC Any% route still has to do the beginning of Nibelheim so that they can set up the glitch for the original wrong warp route. But if we don't do the Calm flashback, that means we don't have the PHS yet. So, how do we get a dead party if we don't have the PHS? This is where the solo Cloud glitch comes in. And just as an aside, I'd like to talk for just a moment about how cool speedrun routing truly is. You see, a lot of different glitches are found in Final Fantasy VII all the time, and a lot of times they're used to try to find viable speedrun routes. Back when the Final Fantasy VII community was desperately trying to find Calm Skip, a trick called Solo Cloud was found, which allowed Cloud to get out of Midgar alone. The community spent days trying to use this Solo Cloud glitch to somehow make Calm Skip happen, but to no avail. So it was put on the shelf in hopes that one day maybe it could be used for something. And well, today is that day. The useless Solo Cloud glitch finally has a purpose, and it just so happens to be the last piece of the puzzle needed to make this whole route work. Using this glitch, we can take only Cloud out of Midgar, and if he happens to already be dead when doing the Solo Cloud glitch, that means we have a full dead party. So using our full dead party, we can set the field ID to match the debug room, then warp into the #1 reactor, save the game, and get to the debug room, and never have to do any part of the Nibelheim flashback, saving upwards of 4 minutes in the Any% route. This new wrong warp is such an incredible find because it takes so many different components of glitches that people have found over the years and melds them all together into one beautiful time save. Not only that, but it may be opening the door to even more finds in the near future. Because of the way warping into the #1 reactor works, some community members are looking into how the game is running code when warping into certain fields, and they may even find a way to make arbitrary code execution work in the future, at least in some capacity. Another version of the route, found by RJ the Destroyer, is looking at potentially warping back into the Coral flashback. And honestly, the list just goes on and on. The entire Final Fantasy VII community are always working together, with information we have from past runners and present to find all sorts of amazing things. And it's not just speedrun stuff either. We are learning more about this game now than we ever have before. Now, with all that said, let me actually walk you through the new route. First, we do the #1 reactor as normal, but we make sure to stop and save once we get the timer after Guard Scorpion. Then, we play through the rest of Midgar as normal, but instead of going to Calm, we go straight to the Chocobo farm and catch a Chocobo. We then do an old version of Calm Skip, which involves moving the Chocobo over to the left side of the marsh and getting into a fight with the Zolom, tricking the game into placing Cloud on the right side of the marsh, but giving him the dialogue option when he gets off the Chocobo to keep the Chocobo in place. This is the hardest version of doing Calm Skip, but unfortunately, it's necessary for this current route. Now we're going to take our Chocobo over to Midgar, and we're going to make sure we kill Cloud before we walk in. I was lucky enough to have the Zolom kill Cloud for me. Now during the speedrun, we always do this trick when you're leaving Midgar to skip all of the rest of the dialogue that the party normally has when you leave. It involves talking to Barrett and trying to leave the screen at the same time, which causes the text boxes to overlap, and gives Cloud movement during the dialogue. This allows Cloud to simply walk out of the field instead of going through all the rest of the dialogue and picking a party. Not only does it skip the dialogue, but it gives you the same party leaving Midgar as you had during the Motorball fight, instead of having you pick a new party. Now, because we skipped this scene, when walking back into Midgar, the scene will replay itself because we never actually finished it. It'll look a bit wonky, but Cloud will float up to the rope and then the scene will play out as normal. From here, we're going to do the solo Cloud glitch, and I have a whole video about it that I'll link down below if you want to know how and why it works. But long story short, we're going to talk to Barret and try to leave at the same time, then we're going to line up on a certain pixel, run up into Red 13, then walk to another specific pixel, and then when Barret sits and his dialogue option appears, we're going to press circle and down at the same time. This will buffer our inputs so that Cloud leaves at the same exact time that the game is removing the party members from your party in order to open up the party select screen. So basically, when the party select screen pops up, it only shows Cloud and allows you to place the other party members in the party. We're leaving on the exact frame that the game removes the party members and puts them on the right side of the screen, but we're leaving before this menu pops up and stops our movement. If done correctly, Cloud will now be outside of Midgar alone and dead. We are now going to finish Calm Skip by taking the Chocobo and doing the movements required to fall through the mountain and walk across the river. Again, if you need a refresher on this, I do have a video explaining the original version of Calm Skip before the newer version was found, where you walk through the mountains near the mines. Now that that's done, we can save the game here and load up that original save we made in the #1 reactor. Here we're going to game over and then load up that save that we just made. This will cause the timer from the reactor to carry over to this save file. And when we get into a fight, we're going to game over before that timer can activate hitting 0. The goal here is to game over to the battle whose battle ID matches the field ID of the debug room, which is this fight. If you get the incorrect fight, you can actually just load the save again and try again. The timer will still be there because it still has not activated yet. Once you game over to the correct fight, you'll want to load another save. And this save can be any save on the world map. The best place for the speedrun route will probably be to save as you're going to the Chocobo farm, as you can just run at the Midgar Zolom and not have to find a random encounter. As soon as this fight starts, the timer will activate 0 and you'll be warped to the #1 reactor. But your field ID is still going to match the battle ID of that fight you game over to. So now we just close out the text box that appears, go to the save point, save, load that save, and now we're placed in the debug room. Now you can simply run down, run over to Tifa, pick LAS 4-0 while holding R1, and finish the game. As I said before, it is just so amazing to see a combination of all the work so many different people have put in finally find a way into the run. Also, if you're wondering why that giant text box appears when you first warp into the reactor, well, it's complicated. But basically, this is supposed to be the timer display. But because of the way the game wipes memory, and because of an error of where the pointers are located, the wrong code ends up being executed. This is where some people in the community have theorized that we might be able to point to other code and run some code that's not supposed to be run. I also want to shout out 2 videos from Chuky, the original video where he explains the route, and then another video where he talks a bit more about the different glitches that can happen depending on how you do the warp. I will link both those videos down below. Thank you so much for watching. It is always such a blessing to talk Final Fantasy VII with you, whether or not it be the speedrun scene or the challenge scene or the glitches that are being found or the modern stuff with the remake or the spin-off games. It's always just so great, and I really appreciate being part of this community. Thanks to my Patreon backers for everything that they do, and I will see you in the next video. Peace.